So how do we get to this part? From moving from a program, a concept, an idea, to a schematic, to the representation of those ideas in form, in function, in texture, in materials, on a site, at a place, in the world, where there's sun and rain and snow and seasons, night and day. Basically, there are two interesting aspects of this. And one is the use of denotation, and one is the use of connotation. If I say that I walked out into a broad, sweeping circular landscape, there are certain provocative notions, ideas, memories that will bring. If I say, like in our language, Bill's thinking in a box. My back was against the wall. Jill has tunnel vision. Those are generally pejorative terms. But notice, they describe a structure. They describe a great deal of our architecture. If we look at our architecture in the traditional sense, think about when you are walking up to one of the traditional public buildings, a bank, the president's office, legislature. You will see steps that go up. That first floor is way in the air. There's some museums in New York City that are still this way. Very interesting. And you notice that the steps have very low risers, very deep treads. Why? Unless you double step, you are walking in a certain cadence. A cadence which is one of respect. This mind-body is a psychosomatic machine. The inputs and the outputs are the same. If you want a person who is very down, put them in a circumstance where they start to laugh. If you walk into and sit down in the traditional corporate boardroom, notice what you see. A very long table. It's 52 inches across. That is outside the interaction, intimate space of most people in most cultures. Around the walls are these pictures of all the dead presidents that came before, whose eyeballs are following you. The message is, I didn't screw it up in my time. Don't you in yours. At the end of the table, through the door, comes the CEO who sits down. Everyone around that table is formally dressed. In the old days, the three-piece suit, the leftover armor from the Middle Ages. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a crisis. I want your creative ideas. Well, there you are. One person across, people like this. Who's going to throw out the crazy idea in that environment? That structure, you see, speaks. It speaks very strongly. You go into the CEO's office, the traditional CEO's office. You come in a door, usually on one corner. You walk across the room. It's a long ways across that room. You sit down at the desk. The desk is 52 inches. The desk is high. It's almost like this. Your chair is low. The CEO, he or she, has the window behind. You cannot read the eyeballs. After a little while, perhaps the CEO says, come, and you go and sit down around a little table and have coffee together, and suddenly the relationship has changed. You're very grateful for that. You walk into a traditional place to buy an automobile. Have you ever noticed that they have very high ceilings, and usually glass at least on two sides, sometimes three, which is interesting because you can't see in from the tarmac or the roadway, other than the fact some little bit. But here's this very large glass space, and here are these beautiful objects, potted plants, spotlights, polished little chrome and glass, painted. And the cars are positioned, they're presented. And after you go in and look at one and start to drool on the hood appropriately, salesman comes up and starts to ask you questions, and when you're ready, takes you into a room. The room is narrow. The room is solid on three sides. On one side is a glass wall looking out at that beautiful car. On the other side is you and your spouse. And on the other side, salesperson. Little wall here has a plaque announcing that this salesperson has sold more cars than anyone on planet Earth. And the table between you is now a narrow table, so that you are in interpersonal distance, and the distance from your chair to the wall behind is very small. You cannot scoot back. When the salesman leans across and pushes the contract to you, this is what's called the close. You are in a closing room. This architecture speaks. These forms, these shapes, these sizes, these volumes, thrust up into the sky, or spread tranquilly across the river. The connotation of these forms, the connotation of color. Why is lipstick traditionally red until recent times, not green or pink? When I say that's a rough surface, what am I conveying? When I say it's as slick as glass, what am I saying? These connotations are the palette by which responses can be invoked. Now, it is true that different cultures have different meanings. White in one culture can mean one thing, black in another, the same thing, and vice versa. Often we get into trouble when we use references to color when we talk to people of other cultures, because they don't interpret those words the same way we do. However, there is a baseline for most of humanity, and that is why pattern language in architecture is so effective, because the same patterns can be seen over and over and over and over, all the way back to the cave. They can be seen in cultures all over the globe today. So connotation, understanding the connotation, understanding it as a palette, understanding the meaning, which is global and universal, local and particular to a culture and to even a town, a place, a tradition, the use of architectural idiom, which is legitimate. All good architectural idioms are still all good architectural idioms. Connotation is a wonderful tool. Denotation is the fact of the matter. You denote it. This is big. This is transparent. This is filtering. This is putting a pattern between you and what you're looking at or is looking at you. That pattern is very kinesthetic and triangular and energized, or lacy and soft. You put connotation to denotation. Take the program statement, which has been rendered with great fidelity, and you start to build a language, not just a general language, a language for this particular project. Architecture is not a visual art. It's not the photograph. It's not looking at it as a static thing. Architecture is an experiential art. It is what happens as you move through it. And it is what happens when the day, the sunlight, the clouds, the weather moves around it, when the seasons change. It is a dynamic and always changing space. When we walk into these rooms, they look the same, with the same high ceiling, and the same fluorescent lights, and the same partitions. No matter the function that takes place, no matter the kind of work that takes place. When we see buildings that are glass on all four walls, what happened to north, south, east, and west? When we see simple, oversimple structures imposed upon the program, imposed upon the requirements, we know that this is not an architecture which has been generated out of a specific program, a program that has universal implications, because architecture does have universal global implications. Architecture does address environments for humanity, for humans, for life forms of many kinds, and specific and particular and local implications and references. Connotation, denotation, building a specific language from the broader pattern language to a particular set of patterns and modules and forms and textures that express your meaning. Not just a general language, a language for this particular project. And how different shapes, forms, volumes not only serve their utilitarian need, but they also serve to address, to express, to explain, to be what the purpose of that space is about.